10%. Now, time to look at the stories that are making the headlines in the media across the world. And we begin with the In paper. It leads on Theresa May's battle with Parliament. The paper claims that rebel MPs are plotting to seize control of the Commons agenda and suspend withdrawal from the EU. The FT takes a different angle, saying Theresa May is now on a collision course with Parliament after refusing to shift her position to secure a Brexit deal. Dominating the front page of The Independent is the opening of UK residency registration. The paper says EU citizens face a crisis bigger than Windrush. Let's move away from Brexit. The front page of the Japan Times looks at the possibility of a merger between Renault and Nissan. We were talking about that a little earlier. And it reports that Paris has been pushing the deal, but Nissan is believed to want to reduce the influence of their French partner. The Daily Mirror says the Queen has sent a message of concern to the woman who broke her wrist in the car crash with Prince Philip. The Duke of Edinburgh, though, apparently has not made contact, says the paper. And finally, the Times says primary school children should start counting sugar cubes in maths lessons to help cut rising levels of obesity. Stuart Thompson is Head of Public Affairs, Government and Infrastructure at the law firm Bircham Dyson Bell and joins me now. Stuart, let's talk about Theresa May. A big day for her yet again today. What are we expecting from that statement to MPs?
Well, there seems to be an ongoing series of big days for the Prime Minister. To be honest, I don't think we expect very much. The discussions with the other political parties don't appear to have gone particularly well. In fact, Labour refused to meet her. And the SNP and others have put their position to her really clearly. And you can sort of see how we've got into this position in the negotiations with Europe. So, you know, a series of red lines which she's not prepared to move on has influenced the discussions with the parties, as it's influenced the European Commission and the institutions over the last, couple of years. So nothing seems to be shifting. And unless she's prepared to sort of loosen the ties or rub out a couple of those red lines, it's very difficult to see how any of this is going to shift in any meaningful way over the next couple of weeks. And, frankly, that end of March deadline is looming. So depending on one's view of these things, that's either a good or a bad thing. But that deadline is that deadline. So I'm not sure we're going to see very much change this afternoon.
She wants cross-party consensus, doesn't she? But the difficulty for her looks now like getting consensus within her own party.
And I think that's the problem here, fundamentally. She spent a lot of time talking to what she thinks the issues that will bind her party together without reflecting what might actually bind in the other political parties across Parliament. So that now she wants to try and open up to actually, frankly, she can't, because she'll alienate huge parts of her own party. So she is stuck between a rock and a hard place, but fundamentally of her own making.
The Financial Times also carries the story another angle. It says Theresa May's poised for Commons clash after refusing to budge on Brexit. What it says, it talks about what she told cabinet ministers yesterday when she met with them and when she had talked to them. She said that she wanted to replace the so-called backstop, that's the insurance policy to avoid the hard Irish border, but she didn't specify how.
And frankly, if it was that easy, she'd have done it months ago. This was always going to be the sticking point. And from the Chequers agreements in the loosest possible sense, through to positions for the DUP, what cabinet ministers have been leaking or briefing the newspapers on particularly, the backstop has been a fundamental problem for months. If it was that easy, if it could be solved in a period of weeks, which now appears to be on offer as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, it would have happened. So I'm not surprised that there are not very many details there, because it would have been solved by now if it were that straightforward. If she can get the DUP outside, her deal will go through in essence. And this is Parliament really saying to her, look, we are Parliament. There are groups of individuals here, as the majority as a whole, that want to hold the government to account. That's what Parliament's for. We want to hold the government to account, and that's what we're going to do here.
Well, some would argue Parliament's there to put forward the will of the people.
Yeah, and the constituents, so they shouldn't be necessarily just bound by, party discipline and party whips. But traditionally, you get one party wins, they have a majority, there's a strong Prime Minister in place, the whole sort of party discipline thing hangs together, and what the government says, what, a cabinet says, holds forth. We're just not in normal circumstances at the moment.
Now, let's talk about this story in The Independent. This is the news that from today, those EU nationals living in the UK will have to apply for settled status. Talk me through exactly what this is.
Well, this appears to be the idea that, if you want to stay in this country as an EU citizen, yes, you may have some time and some leeway, but actually fundamentally you have to register, you have to be involved. Now, the government as a whole has never had the greatest reputation where it comes to IT systems and online form filling.
Who does?
And then add into that, the Windrush scandal and frankly, people that have been here for a very long time, generations, that suddenly found their settlement status queried. This is a real problem. This is the human cost of these decisions. Now, again, come the end of March, these things may go incredibly smoothly, but it sort of leaves a bad taste in the mouth for a lot of people that have been here for a very long time and paid a lot of taxes to us and employed. And, they aren't the sort of the archetypal coming here from certain parts of Europe and claiming, benefits or sending it back home. These are lots of people, lots of work, lots of jobs and tax over a number of years. So
the government argues this is a good way of, logging exactly who's here, their status, their job status.
Yeah, I mean, you could extend that argument to, ID cards years ago under Mrs Thatcher, and they've variously come back under Tony Blair and others. There is an argument to be said that actually, having some sort of recognition of who we all are and what we can.
It's quite expensive as well. £65 for an adult, 35 for kids. That's going to deter a few people, isn't it, from doing it?
I think it will, and I think if the process doesn't work smoothly, it will put a lot of people off. And again, it's that bad taste in the mouth. People just. Is it fair on people that they should have to go through this process and this system despite having been here for a very long time? So I think there are going to be lots of examples over the coming months, very human stories about this system. My fear is this system not working or alienating people. So I think the warning is a fair-placed one.
OK, let's move on now and talk about the story that everyone has been talking about over the weekend, to be quite honest with you. This is the car accident that Prince Philip suffered in his Land Rover. Now, in the Mirror, the headline says, "The Queen sorry, no word from Philip." Obviously, we're not entirely sure this is true, but according to the Mirror, according to sources, the Queen sent a message of concern to one of Prince Philip's crash victims, but he hasn't made contact. What do you make of this whole story?
He appears to think that in some way he's above the law, in the normal rules of the land do not apply to him in the way that they do to you or I or anybody else. The papers, I think, are quite right to ask these sort of questions, and frankly, I'm not entirely clear why the first thing he didn't do, and why, even if he didn't want to, why his advisors didn't say the first thing you have to do is make sure that these people are OK, not just when you sort of get out the crash, but on a more ongoing basis.
My thought was maybe they contacted the driver, but not this lady, because this lady is actually the passenger.
Yeah, possibly. But some good advice would be: look, in any sort of crisis situation, it's very much the human side of the way that companies and organisations react, and this is no different to one of those. And I think, the royal family have taken years to, rebuild their reputation, their standing in the country, and to a large extent abroad as well. This is exactly the sort of story that sort of puts them apart and makes people question them again. Why should he get away? Yeah, why should he get away with things that frankly nobody else would?
But has he got away with it? I mean, he was breathalyzed, wasn't he, by the police? I mean,
he
was
might
treated
receive
as
a
a
warning.
normal citizen.
Yeah,
the question is, if you or I had an accident like this, would we be expected to contact the person and say sorry? I mean, ultimately, you'd let your insurance companies talk, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, maybe he's letting his insurance company talk to them. I don't know, but the royal family are in a completely different position to you and I. Frankly, their expectations of their behaviour and the way and the media spotlight is on them, which is maybe more so than you, but certainly more so than me under normal circumstances. He just appears to have not had that, again, human element. He just appears not to have shown much empathy, really, which is surprising because that's what the royal family have been particularly good at in recent years.
Let's talk about the Japan Times story. This is the Nissan and Renault story. Now, these two companies, obviously, they have an agreement between each other. And the interesting thing here is Nissan was widely seen as wanting to step back from, the agreement between the two. But now it looks like there could be talk of a merger.
Yeah, I mean, automotive sector is hugely well, and the automotive sector is hugely competitive at the best of times and is going through, as is featured in this programme a lot, massive change, and will be focused on big shifts in demand and products, etc., for a long period of time yet. I mean, I hate to bring it back to Brexit, but frankly, anybody that underestimates the value and the worth of Nissan up in the northeast and around Sunderland doesn't really understand the British economy. The Nissan plant up there and the jobs is not just a sign of the economy and the growth and the strength of exports in this country, but actually fundamentally sort of sits with the whole ethos of the place and the recovery post-1980s. And you have to say that, the French involvement more so in the company might question some of those agreements in speech marks that were put together in the immediate sort of post-Brexit environment. So this has huge ramifications, not just for the sector, but I think for us, and that post-Brexit environment, particularly for the North East.
That's an ongoing story. Let's talk about sugar cubes. They used to give you sugar cubes, didn't they, when they gave you a polio inoculation in the old days?
That's it.
I wonder if they'll do that now. Sugar cubes, counting cubes to work out mathematical problems, but also to combat obesity. Do you think that's a good idea?
And look, anything that makes children think about it a little bit more is a good thing. But when I was a kid, which is now a very long time ago, but it was all about how far cars move between places and distances.
But do you even care about sugar? If someone said to you there as a kid, you know what I mean? Kids don't have the same kind of...
No, I think they have a bit more of an understanding about healthy eating. They know they can't eat a load of, in speech marks, sort of junk food in that way. And if this helps them focus on it, that's fine. But I don't think it will achieve much.
OK, Stuart Thompson, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.